Hello, Bourbon fans. I'm Tim, the Suburban Dad. Today, I'm excited for you to join me as I chat with Master Distiller Alex Castle from Old Dominick Distillery in Tennessee. Their whiskey line is fantastic. My favorite is their Huling Station Straight Bourbon. Man, it is one of the most tasty, easily found, and affordable bottles out there. Let's get to it. Now, before we begin, make sure what do you need to do? That's right, hit the subscribe button. Good job. So I'm here today with Alex Castle, Master Distiller from Old Dominick Distillery in Memphis, Tennessee. So welcome, Alex. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we got to meet at an event at Grillo's Chop and Barrel a couple weeks ago out in Lake St. Louis, Missouri here. And so looking forward to diving in about Old Dominick and the Huling Station brand and all of that. So tell me about Old Dominick. They've been around for quite a bit, I understand.
Yeah, our history goes all the way back to the mid 1800s. So our founder, Domenico Canali, was an Italian immigrant. Came over to Memphis in 1856. Chose Memphis because he had family here. He's from northern Italy originally. Settled here in 1856, started working for his uncle who had a wholesale food distributorship. And he learned the ropes, learned what it was to have that type of business, and founded his own company in 1866 that he called D. Canali and Company. And just like his uncle, it was wholesale food. And not long after starting the company, he decided he wanted to try his hand at whiskey. And so he founded the Old Dominick brand. Did not make his own whiskey. He bought aged product from Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, anywhere that had aged product available. Brought it to Memphis on rail cars, dumped it, and then bottled it under the Old Dominick name. And from what we can tell, shortly after that, wholesale liquor became honestly the biggest part of his business for a long time, up until Prohibition. It seems like Old Dominick was also a very, very big brand in the Southeast as well. But of course, Prohibition hit, so all that had to stop. Fortunately for us, D. Canali continued operation. They still were in food and other business ventures over the years. Fast forward, and about 2013, the current president, Chris Canali Jr., he's Domenico's great-great-grandson.
Oh, wow.
He steps in as president of the parent company and is fairly young. He's in his 30s and is trying to figure out what his legacy is. What is he going to do for his family's company? What is going to be what he leaves behind? And he wanted to get the company back to Memphis. At this point, everything was outside of Memphis, or it was just investments. There was no real connection to Memphis at that point. And so he decides to bring back Old Dominick, but in an even bigger way than Domenico ever had. And he decided to open a distillery.
All right.
And so 2015, we start construction on a downtown distillery in Memphis, with the goal of it being a whiskey distillery that also happens to make vodka and gin. And that's around the time that they hired me. I moved to Memphis to help get everything started, open the distillery doors in May of 2017. And at the time, we just had vodkas, added a gin 3 years later.
Okay.
And we also worked with MGP as well, to contract distill some product for us. So we also were able to do a little bit of whiskey as well.
Awesome. Wow, that's quite the journey from where it started to where it is today.
And it zigzagged all over between in there. It's a very condensed version of our history.
Yeah, yeah. Very neat. I was reading a little bit on the website, got kind of cliff notes, but yeah, that's amazing. Thankfully, Prohibition did not keep them from producing, because that could have been the end of the line right there.
Absolutely.
And then so in terms of whiskey, you guys have your Huling Station line. I got to try, are there just the three expressions in that line?
So really, there's a fourth one that you didn't get to try that day because it's our single barrel.
Okay.
And we only do those as store picks. So we tend not to take those to tastings. But yeah, so we have our red label, which is the original. That's our high rye bourbon, 100 proof. Um, if you like rye whiskey, it's a bourbon for you. It's kind of how we look at it. It's great in cocktails. Then there's, of course, the gray label, and that's our wheat whiskey. It's 83% wheat, so it's a very high wheat content. When we bottle that 90 proof, very light, very approachable whiskey. Then there's the blue label. That's a 50-50 blend of those two products. And again, 100 proof. So great in cocktails, great on the rocks. And then our black label, which is a single barrel version of the red label.
Nice. Okay. So the black label, that's only store picks. You guys don't bottle that yourselves otherwise.
Nope.
Okay.
Strictly store pick.
You got to be on the lookout for those.
Absolutely.
And
they're worth hunting down, I promise.
I'm looking for it. Mike, again, at Grillo's mentioned that he's got one coming. And after tasting this one and the other two expressions, I mean, I'm pretty excited for that to come out.
And that one, I was actually part of his barrel pick.
Oh, fun.
And he ended up with a very, very good 8-year-old barrel. So
wow. From the hands of the creator herself. Oh, that's fantastic.
Our Healing Station line, yes, it's not liquid that we produced here in Memphis, but we did do it a little bit differently than what a lot of people do. Yes, we went to MGP, but that's our custom mash bill. It's our yeast, it's our barrels. It's very much our juice. We just had to use someone else's distillery.
Now, what I found interesting, and you mentioned the high rye content, 44% rye in this bourbon. And correct me if I'm wrong, that's the highest rye content in a bourbon on the market. Right?
As far as we know, we have yet to find a bourbon that has a higher rye content.
Wow. And that's one of the things that jumped out at me right away when I tried this was the rye notes. There's some spice, not super intense there, but the chocolate. I got such a cocoa note on that. It was fantastic.
That's one of my favorite things about the red label is I'm like you, I always get like dark chocolate.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Fantastic. And this bottle for, again, 100 proof and a very reasonable, affordable price, around $35-ish. It's a fantastic, like it's so rich and complex. Like it's surprising. You would expect it to have a higher proof with how much flavor is in there. Not that it drinks hot, but that it's so flavorful. So I really enjoy it quite a bit. I've already talked it up, and my buddy's bought 2 of them already because he liked it so much.
Fantastic. One other great thing about that product, to have that complexity, we do very small batch. We're a very small distillery. So every batch is roughly 6 barrels.
That truly is, my definition, a small batch.
That's why we even put very on the label. It's very small batch.
Very small. There you go. I imagine that helps control make it more repeatable at that size.
Actually, it's kind of the opposite. That small, it's harder to repeat. The more barrels you have, the easier it is to mask. That barrel's a little different. It's a little weird. It's hard to mask that unless you have a lot of barrels. So really what I tell people is expect some variance from bottle to bottle, depending on how long it's been since you bought one. It could be very different because we also only have so many vintages. We've only done so many production runs with MGP. And so like we did a run in 2014, a run in 2016, and again in 2019. Well, 2019 is not old enough yet. We're not touching it.
Yep.
We're waiting for it to be at least 4 years old. So we have a blend of anywhere from 4 to 8-year-old, depending on where we are with the different vintages.
Nice. But at least that 4-year mark.
Always.
Yeah.
Yep. That's why there's no age statement on the bottle as well, is we do minimum of 4. But it changes so much that we couldn't put the age on the bottle because we'd have to change the label way too much. Well,
for those of you watching, highly recommend. I did a quick short video about this for tasting notes and that, but highly recommend if you haven't already. Do you know, Alex, is there anywhere in the US that it's not distributed? so far?
There are quite a few states that we're not in,
Okay.
but we do have some online retail partners. So if you're in a state that allows shipping to you, there are some online options, but the best option is to go to olddominick.com. Make sure you get two D's in there, make sure there's a K at the end. And we have a where to find us section. You're able to type in your zip code. You can search by product and it'll tell you where you can find us.
I'll make sure to put the link in the description so people can find that easily. What about the Tennessee whiskey release?
We're we're in the middle of a huge production run right now, bottling wise, because we're about to release our first ever Old Dominick produced whiskey. It happens to be a
Okay.
Tennessee whiskey, so it does go through that sugar maple charcoal Lincoln County process,
Mhm.
and that should be hitting. Unfortunately, this year it's only Memphis. We're doing a super small release for 2022.
Okay.
But it will hit our retail stores November 1st, and then hopefully starting spring of 2023, we'll start to spread it to our other markets. It's the first whiskey to be mashed, distilled, aged, and bottled in Memphis since Prohibition.
Oh,
So
gosh.
it's a huge, huge milestone, not just for Old Dominick, but also for Memphis.
So you are the master distiller for Old Dominick. You are, again, the first female master distiller. Congratulations on that. That is fantastic.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself. How did you get to be where you're at now?
So I'm originally from Kentucky. I always start with that because I think that just automatically means you're going to end up in the bourbon industry. So my entire childhood, up until 15, I thought I would be a marine biologist,
Oh, wow.
and then finally took biology and realized how terrible it was.
Yeah,
So
that's my
it
background.
was
Careful.
it was not good for me. It was awful. Um, so I had to switch gears and discovered chemistry and physics and calculus. And my mom suggested chemical engineering instead for a major. I was like, okay, great. That's what I'll study. But what do you do with it? And she said, you can make beer and be a brewmaster, or you can make bourbon and be a master distiller. And I said, okay, let's do it. Um, so I went to the University of Kentucky, studied chemical engineering. While I was there, I actually got to do a co-op, basically a fancy name for an internship, with a company called Alltech. At the time, they were still small, relatively unknown, and their main thing was animal nutrition supplements. So very fancy animal feed.
Okay.
But they also had a brewery, which is why I took the internship with them. And their brewery is Lexington Brewing Company. They do Kentucky Ale,
Okay.
and Kentucky Bourbon Barrel Ale. That's the one most people know.
Wow.
And so that's why I took it. So I was working for them, working in their engineering department. And they actually brought over two pot stills from Scotland and added them to the brewery.
Wow.
And didn't have anyone to run it. And my boss knew I was interested in that stuff. And so he actually put me on that project. I got to train with a retired distiller from Scotland
Wow.
for about 2 weeks. It was absolutely fantastic. I ran the stills from that point on, filled the first 100 or so barrels of what would become Pierce Lyons Reserve, which
Okay.
is now Town Branch.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
yeah, most people don't know Pure Science Reserve, but that's how it started, and then it became Town Branch.
Okay.
And it's from that first distillation on, I was like, okay, this is what I gotta do this for a living. This is what I need to do. So then fast forward, and I end up at Wild Turkey as a production supervisor after graduation, and in that role was overseeing grains receiving, milling, mashing, fermentation, distillation,
Wow.
byproduct treatment. So all the stillage got to be a part of that process,
Hmm.
and was there for about 4 years, kind of learning the ropes, being trained to take on the role of production manager, and got a message on LinkedIn that asked me if I wanted to move to Memphis to help start a distillery. And I said, sure.
Wow. How has it been received being the first female master distiller in the whiskey community?
So fortunately, it was only Tennessee. I was only the first in Tennessee,
Okay.
but there weren't that many female master distillers in the country at the time either.
Yeah.
Um, Honestly, it's been good. I've been fortunate. My experience in this industry, yes, it's male dominated. I usually am the only woman in the room, or at least for a long time it was that way. I, I haven't really had to put up with too many obstacles or hurdles because I'm the only woman in the room. Everyone's, I guess I've proven myself enough that I'm just another distiller.
Yeah.
Um, but it's, I've definitely have been given a lot of opportunities as a female distiller, to speak to different groups. And for me, if I can open the door, if I can help people figure out that this is an industry you want to get into and can help you get there, I will gladly like yell the fact that I'm a female distiller and say, okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
But no, it's been a wonderful experience.
Excellent. So I'm curious, with being the master distiller, I imagine you're tasting a lot of different spirits. How did you train your palate to get to this point?
Time, a lot of practice, and by that, just sitting down and tasting different things. Um, I was fortunate at Wild Turkey to have gone through a sensory evaluation and qualified for their expert sensory panel.
Oh, wow.
And that was not just Wild Turkey, that was for their parent company's Campari. And so it was for all of North America. And so it was getting to go through that type of training and being exposed to not just whiskey, but here's, the most basic of sour compounds, taste it. Here's the
Mhm.
most basic of sweet compounds, taste it. And even doing it at various concentrations. So to see how sensitive we were to each of those different compounds.
Wow.
Um, but it's about just taking the time to do it, and sit there and just keep sipping, what do you taste next? What do you taste next? And it's just training your palate, training your brain. I think one of the hardest parts for people when sampling something is you can taste something and you're like, I recognize this.
Mhm.
The hardest part is connecting that to an actual word.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what I've seen, because it's hard for me sometimes, but I've seen it's hard to make that connection to what am I actually tasting. um, and it's just training. It's just taking the time to do it and not being afraid of saying something because you think it's going to be the wrong thing,
Okay.
because there is no wrong thing. What you
Gotcha.
taste is what you taste.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's fascinating about whiskey and bourbon is just how one person can like something so much, and then the next person is ready to pour it down the drain because they can't stand it.
Oh, my husband and I do not agree on whiskey whatsoever.
Oh,
We're almost always complete
wow.
opposites.
Okay. All right.
Needless to say, we have a very, very large whiskey collection at the house to make up for that.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I'm glad you guys can work out your differences. Are you literally just sipping on, we'll stick with whiskey for the moment, sipping on whiskey throughout the day to sample and assess, or is it something where you taste it and you basically just spit it out afterwards, or how does that work? I've been curious.
It depends on what you're doing. So when it's time to find barrels for the single barrel program, for me personally, I am most awake, both mentally and palate wise, in the mornings.
Okay.
It's when I'm freshest. So that's when I go and I sample the barrels. And I will literally pull a sample from one barrel, sit there, smell it, taste it, make my notes, say, yes, it's a single barrel. No, it's not. And you got to, for me, at least with whiskey, you can't just take a sip and spit it out, because a huge part of a whiskey experience is how it feels as it goes down.
Mhm.
There's only one way to experience that, and that's to actually consume it.
Yeah.
And so when I do that just barrel after barrel, I usually limit myself to 8 to 12 barrels.
Mhm.
More than that in one, that's some high proof alcohol. But also your palate, there's such thing as palate fatigue.
Mhm.
You stop being able to identify the individual notes. It all kind of blurs together. Your tongue gets numb. So I limit it to that. And sometimes that means I have to be up there every morning to be able to get through what I need to.
Yeah,
But it's just knowing what your limits are
makes
on
sense.
it.
Yeah, sure. And I get a lot of comments about that. How do you pick all these flavors out? And it's like, well, kind of like what you were saying, it's been a process for me
Mhm.
too. I haven't done as nearly as formal training as you've had, but it at first, yeah, you start to pick out, okay, this is more sweet, this is more peppery, spicy. And then from there, okay, what kind of sweet is it? Is it more caramel candy? Is it more fruity? It, one step at a time.
Exactly. You start at that high tier and
Mhm.
then try to keep breaking it down. One example I always give is, a lot of people are able to say, "Ooh, I taste baking spices." Okay, that's good. What kind of baking spice?
And then which one? Yeah.
And if you can't go further than baking spice, that's fine.
Yeah.
But challenge yourself. See if you can identify of all the baking spices, which
Yeah.
one is it?
Yeah. I would say of all the notes, that might be the trickiest one for me. I often hit that bake spice roadblock. And it's like, what though?
I don't bake a whole lot, so
Yeah. Yeah. You're not as familiar in the kitchen there. That could really hold you back that way, I would
and
imagine.
I will say that's probably been my biggest challenge is I don't really cook.
Uh,
So identifying the different spices, whether it's, cooking spice or baking spice, it is more challenging because I don't do any of that.
you guys collaborated with, you did a special release bottle, all the cookies, is that right?
But yes, that was one of our R&D releases.
Okay.
So we have a distillery only product line that I created back in 2018, I think. It started with gin.
Okay.
And so we've done a couple gins, including a barrel rested gin. We've done a coffee vodka, but by far the most popular one has been a bourbon.
Okay.
It was a collaboration with a local brewery here in Memphis called Meddlesome. Uh, they took, I don't know, like a dozen barrels from us at one time and made 5 different beers
Hmm.
and put them in those barrels
Okay.
and had me come out and taste them as they were aging. And my favorite beer was called All the Cookies Ale. And it's an oatmeal raisin cookie ale. Like they
Wow.
actually ferment on the raisins. When it goes in the barrel, they add cinnamon, they add vanilla beans, they do a whole thing. And they asked me if I wanted a barrel back to put bourbon in. I was like, oh, I don't know about that. This could be bad. But then I was like, oh, that beer's so good. We're going to try. And so we did. We put bourbon back in it, let it sit for that first release. It was 2 weeks. That's it.
Oh,
two
wow.
weeks in the barrel.
Hmm.
And we ended up with an oatmeal raisin cookie bourbon.
Okay.
It still had the bourbon flavor. Like you knew you were drinking bourbon,
Yeah.
but it was an oatmeal raisin cookie. Uh, and so that we did that the first year. And unfortunately hit our retail shop, I think 2, 3 weeks before the pandemic.
Oh,
So, so we did end up selling out because of people doing curbside. But we got such positive response that Meddlesome did another batch of it the following year. So we actually did a version 2 of all the cookies,
oh,
and
nice.
it sold out within, I want to say, 2 or 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
And they only do one barrel. So that's all we're able to do is one barrel.
Yeah.
But we actually have year 3 of it aging right now. So hopefully all the cookies 3.0 will come out either later this year or beginning of next year.
Wow. Everybody stay ready.
And don't ask me if I can ship it. Okay. Legally, we're not allowed to ship it.
Okay. Fair enough. Have to take a trip to Memphis then.
Exactly.
I've seen these bottles, this one and the wheat, straight wheat and the mix. I've seen those on the shelves. They're all over here in St. Louis. I mean, grocery stores, liquor stores, you name it, they're everywhere. And I truly, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, became one of those things where my brain just started filtering them out. There's, more than a couple bottles these days out there. And
Yep.
after a while, I just kept seeing it. It's like, okay, mine would go blank.
Yep.
Finally got to try it with you, and I was amazed. So that is truly the goal of this channel and this project that I do, is helping people find bottles like this that you can actually just walk in and buy
Yeah,
for
you don't have to hunt them.
no,
Yeah,
and they're fantastic.
thank you.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
that
so
was our goal with that line, is I always wanted it to be affordable. I
mhm,
wanted it to be easy to find. Like, sure, have your $80 bottles, have your hard to finds, but
mhm.
I didn't want that. I wanted a reasonably priced everyday whiskey, but that was also still good.
Well, I think you guys definitely nailed it there. So job well done for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up on all the hype, on social media. Everybody's talking about all the allocated bourbons. And don't get me wrong, I still hunt for a decent number of them. Some of them I've learned are not worth the hunt, but
100%.
great to find one that can be your go-to and is still amazing. So,
Thank you.
well, thank you for joining me, Alex. It's been a pleasure. And again, for those of you watching, make sure that you check out Old Dominick Distillery, and we'll put the link in the description. If you don't have these expressions in your area, check online, see if you can order it. All of them were really good. This one in particular stood out to me the most, but none of them were, didn't find a bad bottle among them. So check it out.